June is quickly coming to a close, which means that we are officially halfway through 2025. A lot has happened this year, and I felt as though it would be a good time to do a bit of a mid-year check-in. Do a bit of a pulse check. Check to see how the market is faring, some things to keep in mind, and of course, whether right now is a good time to buy a car, and if not, then when. Now, as we know, the car market has been a bit turbulent to say the least. Interest rates are still high. In fact, just last week, the Federal Reserve has opted in to keeping rates steady, at least for now, which means that they have opted out of doing either a rate cut or a rate hike. But we do have another Fed meeting in July, another one in September, October, and December, and at those points, we could potentially see rate cuts. But as we sit here today, the federal funds rate is currently at 4.25 to 4.5%, which is where it's been since December of 2024. And the average interest rate for a car loan sits anywhere between 5 and 21%, depending on the borrower and whether they're buying a used or new vehicle, but you can see the full breakdown here. However, as we've talked about on this channel many times, interest rates aren't the only thing that are affecting the car market, because tariffs are as well. Now, I think we can all agree that tariffs have been an incredibly volatile topic. But for the sake of clarity and for the sake of not making this video super long, I don't want to dive into what tariffs have been and some of the different policies that we've seen over the last couple of months. Instead, I want to touch on some of the points of where we are with tariffs today. And as we sit here today, for the most part, there is a 25% tariff on imported cars. But as of June 16th, this was amended due to a trade deal with the UK, which would reduce the tariff rate to 10% for the first 100,000 vehicles imported, from the UK specifically. Now, technically, it is a 7.5% tariff with a 2.5% tariff added on to that, totaling 10%. But that's neither here nor there, because what you need to know is that it is a 10% tariff on these UK imported vehicles. And these would be cars like Land Rover and Range Rover, Jaguar, Aston Martin, Rolls-Royce, Mini, McLaren, and Bentley. Now, other countries in the UK aside, of course, vehicles assembled here in the United States are not subject to the same tariffs. And whenever you think of the phrase made in America, you may think of brands like the big three, being Stellantis, General Motors, and Ford. You'd actually be wrong, because while these brands do have US factories for different models, so do brands like Honda, Toyota, Hyundai, Volkswagen, Mercedes-Benz, Volvo, and a slew of others. So just because a brand that you may be looking at buying may be a non-American brand doesn't necessarily mean that that brand or that model wasn't assembled here in the United States. Which means that whenever you look at tariffs and how they're impacting vehicle prices, there are a variety of cars that could have completely different tariff burdens, despite the fact that some of these may be from the same manufacturer. However, assembly in the US is just one piece of the puzzle, because auto parts tariffs are still a thing. This is 25% for some countries, 10% for others, and for some countries like Mexico and Canada, there's an exemption. There is also tariff relief offered on cars that have final assembly here in the US. This is in the form of a credit, which ranges from 2.5% to 3.75% of MSRP, and it's made to offset the cost of tariffs on auto parts, and automakers can only qualify if a car has final assembly in the United States. However, this is a credit that is issued to the automaker, not to the consumer, so I am a bit skeptical on whether or not those savings from that credit will be passed on to the consumer in the form of cheaper prices. And so even with this credit in mind, because of the auto parts tariff and just auto tariffs in general, there is a high likelihood that a vehicle that you buy at the end of 2025 will be more expensive than it would have been this time last year. With some studies estimating that 80% of the tariff cost will be passed down to the consumer, which equates to about $1,700 on average. Now, tariffs aside, dealership inventory is quite good, even if car prices and incentives aren't, which is a very frustrating statistic to me, because over the last couple of years, we have heard time and time again from dealerships and automakers that the reason why car prices went up was simply because of supply and demand. There was too much demand, not enough supply, and as a result, prices skyrocketed. But this is obviously not entirely the case, because currently, as we sit here, inventory has returned to normal and prices have not. And car prices are still extremely expensive, despite the fact that inventory levels are very, very high. But let's pivot to electric vehicles, because this is a segment of vehicle that could see some major changes in the back half of 2025. Now, one of Donald Trump's campaign talking points was that he wanted to get rid of the EV tax credit, or what he called the EV mandate.
On day one, I will terminate Crooked Joe's ridiculous electric vehicle mandate.
And Trump's big, beautiful bill, which did pass the House, it's currently in the Senate, but it is seeing some pushback in the Senate. There is language in this bill which would essentially get rid of the EV tax credit. Now, I don't know if this bill is going to pass the Senate or if the EV tax credit language will stay in it. However, I do feel confident that at some point during Trump's presidency, the EV tax credit is either going to be changed dramatically or it's going to go away entirely, which will not only have a major impact on EV demand, but it will also dramatically impact the affordability of electric vehicles as well. And so if buying an electric vehicle is something that you've been considering, or it's something that you know that you want to do in the coming months or in the next year or so, this is a purchase that I would absolutely recommend making sooner than later. And to be honest, when reflecting on 2025 and also laying out my predictions for the rest of the year, that is probably my biggest takeaway. Now, if I was in the market to buy a car, whether new or used, I would probably wait until closer to the end of the year in order to make that purchase. But to be honest, the price difference between now and the end of the year will probably only be a couple of percentage points, if that, because while prices for cars may go up towards the end of the year, incentives should also go up as just a byproduct of approaching the end of the year. And as we see here today, car prices may be a bit cheaper than where there will be in a couple of months, but incentives are quite low, especially compared to 6 months ago. But to be honest, in the short term, and by that I mean the next 6 months, I don't really predict that there will be any major swings in prices for either new or used cars. But I do think that there could be some major changes to this EV tax credit, and this would bring major changes really quickly to the affordability of EVs that would have an impact after this year. Now, the good news is that with the current bill on the table, it does look as though the EV tax credit would end at the end of 2025, so going into 2026. So you do have the rest of the year to decide if that's a purchase that you want to make. It's not like the change would be instantaneous, but it absolutely would affect you if you were somebody who was wanting to buy next year. The reality is inventory is in a good spot. Interest rates may go down with these next Fed meetings coming up between now and the end of the year, but even if rates are cut, they're not going to be cut dramatically, and that isn't going to trickle down to the car market immediately either. And car prices are still high, and this isn't going to swing in either direction either, at least not in the next 6 months. And so to be honest, buy a car now, buy a car later, I don't really think it matters. Instead, what I do think matters is buying a car that you can afford with a relatively good interest rate, paying attention to depreciation, and choosing a term that actually makes sense for the vehicle that you're buying and your personal financial situation. Like always, you guys, I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, comments, if you have anything to add, I would love to hear it, so make sure to leave a comment down below. And while you guys are at it, make sure to hit the like button, hit that subscribe button, and hit the notification bell, and I will see you guys in the next video.